thankful I can see. Right? Probably no one thought that, although it would be a totally justified thing to think, because vision is quite a gift. If you think about what you would have missed out on today without your vision, imagine your day without it. Everything changes, right? You wouldn't have been able to navigate through your house to get ready for the day so easily. I mean, you'd get used to being blind. Eventually, blind people can navigate their homes and do it with ease over time, but especially if you just lost your vision, you'd have quite a hard time navigating around. Making breakfast would have been pretty difficult, maybe even dangerous. You certainly wouldn't be driving to work, not on your own anyways. Fixing your hair and picking out your outfit and all that, that would be a totally different experience. And that's just some of the practical daily stuff. Think of maybe the more big things, like you wouldn't ever be able to see the beauty of a sunset, the glowing gold and pink of just a simple, beautiful sunset. You'd never be able to see the bright green grass that comes up in the spring. You'd never be able to see mountains or birds or waterfalls or all of these wonderful things that we get to look at. You'd never see the smiling faces of your loved ones. You would lose so much more than you even realize if you lost the ability to see. Vision is maybe one of the most valuable gifts that you've been given from God. And as a side note, vision is indeed a gift. It is important to think about it that way. Not one of us earned the ability to see. Right? Nobody worked for it. You got it just because God gave it to you, and it's quite a gift. But there's more than just one kind of seeing. There's more than just physical sight with your eyeballs. There's spiritual sight as well. You can see the world with your physical eye, or otherwise you are blind. In a similar way, spiritually, you're either seeing spiritually or you're spiritually blind. Jesus pits two extremes here against each other, having a single eye and having an evil eye. And the way he's using extremes here, he often does this, as we've talked about in the Sermon on the Mount. He puts extremes up against each other in multiple places. But there is some in between the extremes in reality. I think a great illustration of this is the time when Jesus, in Mark chapter 8, when Jesus heals a blind man. He takes him, walks with him out of the city, and then he takes spit and puts it over his eyes and then asks the man to open his eyes and tell him what he sees. And the man says, "I see men, but as trees walking." It's like, I see people, but they look like I can't tell people and trees apart. So Jesus touches his eyes again and says, "Now what do you see?" And he says, I see all things clearly. So that illustrates that in that healing that there are times in which sight comes in phases and degrees. You can see better or worse. And most of us here probably are somewhere between being blind and seeing 20/20, right? I see a lot of glasses here, and I'm sure there's contacts out there as well. So probably most of us are somewhere in that middle ground. We know what it's like to not be able to see everything clearly, but we're not blind either. Spiritual sight can be a similar way, that maybe you're not totally blind. Maybe you're not lost in your sin like you were before you were saved, but that doesn't mean that you see all things perfectly clearly either. There's still some spiritual sight to be made clear. The point I want to make here, though, is this. Ultimately, there's two ultimate ways of seeing the world. There's clearly or unclearly. And when someone doesn't see things clearly, it's not just they're seeing it their way, right? Imagine you're riding with a friend in their car, and someone who normally wears glasses, and they don't have their glasses on, and you think, oh, okay, well, they're probably just wearing contacts. You just assume. But then they ask you what the upcoming street sign says, and it's pretty close, and then they blow through a stop sign, and then there's a deer in the middle of the road, and they're not slowing any signs of slowing down. You got to yell at them and get them to stop the car, and you beg them to pull over, right? Like, what's going on? And they just say, oh, this is just my way of seeing the world. I just liked it. No, it is not just your way of seeing the world. You're seeing things unclearly. It's not that the world changes for you because you see it unclearly. You're either seeing it clearly or you're seeing it unclearly. The world is the same whether you see it clearly or not. The problem is your vision. The vision is what needs to be healed, what needs to be fixed. And also, again, with seeing on a spiritual plane. What does it mean, though, to see on a spiritual level? I think another great example of seeing things spiritually. There's so many ways you could illustrate this from the life of Jesus, but the first account that came to mind for me when I was thinking about that is also related to the content of our passage tonight about our use of wealth and money. I think of when Jesus came into the temple and he saw the money changers sitting there. These people were supposed to be spiritual leaders, but they've become marketeers. You know, they're making money. They turned the house of worship into a house of merchandise. And most people had no one was angry about that, right? Everybody walks in, they see it, they're fine, nobody cares. It's just the way we do things, right? Nobody cares. But when Jesus saw that, he was angry. He was enraged. And the reason he was enraged is what he saw what other people could not see. He saw that these people who were supposed to be the spiritual shepherds of Israel were using the people for their own benefit rather than actually guiding them to God like they were supposed to be. He saw what other people weren't seeing because he was seeing spiritually. You could say really in every situation, read any story about Jesus and just assume, oh, Jesus is probably seeing things that I'm not even seeing. And in every story, that's going to be the case because, of course, spiritually speaking, he had perfect vision. And we have a lot of room to grow in that direction, to have our spiritual vision be made clear like his is. Jesus wants his followers to be able to see spiritually like he does. Again, if you remember that important verse in chapter 5, he says he wants us to be perfect as the Father in heaven is perfect. And again, that word perfect, part of that idea is to be whole, to be complete. And it's very related to the verses we'll be looking at tonight about seeing. Let me read those verses again, verses 22 through 23. And they read almost like a riddle, actually. This is, to be honest with you, this is maybe the hardest to understand of the verses in the Sermon on the Mount. As far as just surface level understanding, it doesn't immediately click. And I think it's supposed to be that way. I think it's kind of like a riddle. It's kind of told, he says it in such a way where you kind of have to go back and forth and compare one part with another to kind of make sense of it. We'll read it again, verses 22 and 23. He said, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness?" Okay, so just break this down a little bit. Jesus says, basically the eye is like a lamp for the body, from which the body receives its light. So he begins with this just basic assumption, an eye functions like a lamp. So kind of the illustratively here, what's happening is when you look at something, it's almost like casting light on that thing. For your body anyways, the only way your body has the ability to perceive the things around you is that your eye kind of casts in that direction. It's like casting light. And then for your body, that looking at it becomes the light of the thing that you're looking at. You cast your gaze on an object, it's kind of like putting a lamp on it for you to be able to, your brain to be able to see it and perceive it. And then the body receives that light, which means that what you see, then your body's able to navigate, right? You're going to interact with the world around you based on what you're seeing. So your body has a light because your eyes can see. So your body receives light through your eyes, but on a spiritual level, it also means that that your body or yourself, you have light in the world, you have light in your life through clear spiritual sight. And also, Jesus talks about light in another place on the Sermon on the Mount. He says, "You are the light of the world." So your eyes seeing has a connection with what it means to be the light of the world. The problem, of course, though, is that we don't all see clearly. And it's proportional to how badly you're seeing is how much you're not being a light. So this is important, which is where, okay, we'll talk about what it means to have an evil eye. What does that mean? On the most basic literal level, it just means a bad eye, right? An eye that can't see. It's pretty clear. However, the phrase evil eye, actually, it shows up in a few other places in the Bible. This isn't Jesus just kind of putting together a random phrase. He's actually quoting some Old Testament passages. There's some New Testament. He also talks in another passage in the Gospel of Matthew about evil eye. So if we look at those passages, I think it's going to help us understand what does an evil eye mean. And let me read a few to you. Deuteronomy 15 says this: "Beware that there be not a thought in thy wicked heart, saying, the seventh year, the year of release, is at hand, and thine eye be evil against thy poor brother, and thou givest him not. And he cry unto the Lord against thee, and it be sin unto thee." You hear that? In this passage, what it means to have, what he says, when your eye is evil, that means you saw your brother had a need, and you looked away. That's an evil eye, okay? Another passage, Proverbs 28:22 says, "He that hasteth to be rich hath an evil eye, and considereth not that poverty shall come upon him." I think that might be the primary verse that Jesus has in mind here. He just said, don't lay up treasures on earth. The moths are going to eat it, and the rust is going to corrupt it, and thieves are going to steal it. So someone who has an evil eye is someone who's ignoring that fact that Jesus just taught a moment ago, that treasures here on earth are unstable, and they all go away eventually. Jesus also tells a parable in Matthew chapter 20 where you probably remember this one. He goes out and hires some day laborers. At the beginning of the day, he hires them and agrees to a set wage. And they say, okay, that's the standard daily wage. We'll come and work for you all day. And then he goes out halfway through the day, gets some more workers, and he just tells them, I'll pay you what you're worth. And they say, okay. And then he goes out at the end of the day, just an hour of work left to do. And he says, I'll pay you for your work, whatever you're worth, just come and work. And they say, okay. And they come and work. And then Jesus, in the parable, the master who hired all these, he pays everybody the same amount. Now he pays the people who worked all day the agreed wage, what they deserved. He said he was going to pay them. But the ones who worked for an hour got the same wage that the ones who worked all day. And the ones who worked all day looked and said, well, this isn't fair. Why would you do that? And the master's response is your eye evil because I am good? So what he's saying there is does it make you envious of the stuff that I gave out because you think I'm being too generous? And Jesus is saying, that's the way I give to people. So if that offends you, then you're going to have a problem with my kingdom, because I give according to what I see is good. And I'm generous and I'm good. And so what we see in that passage then, also in those passages, and there's a few others I'm not even going to quote, that use the phrase evil eye. And every single time, it's about somebody being envious or not generous in some way or another, every time. So Jesus isn't just talking about an eye that doesn't work, okay? He's talking about somebody who sees needs and ignores them. An evil eye is a broken eye. It's an eye that selfishly sees the world for only what it can take. There are two ways of seeing the world. The evil way, the broken way, is to look at the world as an opportunity to be a taker. It's to have an evil eye is to look at the world as a place of scarcity. That means the way you look at the world is the world just doesn't quite have enough for everybody. Right? There's not quite enough for you to get what you need, and maybe even a little bit more, and for me to get what I need and a little bit more. There's scarcity in the world. And it's natural for our carnal, fallen flesh to look at the world this way. But Jesus is teaching us a different way of seeing. The problem with the evil eye is that it's greedy. It takes. It's selfish. We do this when we look at our jobs the way the secular world looks at jobs, that my job is just an opportunity for me to accumulate wealth, and that's all it is. We look at our income sometimes is it belongs to me rather than everything I have is God's. We treat other people's successes as though it's a threat to my success, as if we couldn't both be successful. And worst of all, we see other people's needs and ignore them because we don't want to drain our resources. All of those tendencies are normal, at least in a carnal way, and they all define what it means to have an evil eye. When we navigate life by these selfish values, Jesus is saying, you lack spiritual sight. Your eye is evil. It's broken. The problem is you aren't seeing the world the way it really is. Your spiritual sight is unclear. To see the world this way is to have a body full of darkness. And Jesus says, how great is that darkness? If your value system is governed by selfishness, how great is your darkness? You are so unclear on the way things work. The reality that of the world is this, that God is good, that there isn't a problem of scarcity. And if you see the world as though it's a scarce place where I've got to hoard my stuff and protect it all for me, you do not see things clearly. You need spiritual healing. As Jesus touched the eyes of the blind and healed them, what we need is for the Lord to heal our selfish way of looking at things. You need your eye to be made single, is the word that Jesus uses. We'll look at a single eye. What is a single eye? An interesting thing about the word single is that it has two meanings. It's a really interesting word. It can either mean whole, as in it works as a whole, right? It's whole, one whole thing. It's whole, it's healed, it works right. It also means generous. Another form of the same word is used when it says that God, in James chapter 1, it says, ask God for wisdom, who gives to all men liberally and upbraideth not. And that word liberally is the same word as single here. Generously. So it both means a whole eye, a healthy eye, and also a generous eye. I believe Jesus, he selected this word very carefully on purpose because it's supposed to mean both things at the same time. A single eye or a healthy eye is a generous eye. It's pretty clear in the context here of Jesus talking about treasures and wealth and money and mammon and all that. That's exactly what he's talking about. He's talking about a good eye is an eye that's generous. Another great example of this is Proverbs 22. It says, he that hath a bountiful eye, and that word bountiful literally is just the word good, a good eye. He that has a bountiful eye, a good eye, shall be blessed. For, here's why he's blessed, he giveth of his bread to the poor. So according to the Old Testament, another very clear passage that seems like is probably on Jesus' mind is a good eye is an eye that sees the need of the poor and gives him bread. That's what it means to have a good eye. Another great example of this is the high priestly blessing from Numbers chapter 6, where the Aaron and his sons, the priesthood, would pray for the people, and they would say this, the Lord bless thee and keep thee and make his face shine upon thee. Think of the light of the eyes, right? Make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. Do you hear that? Bless, be gracious, give. These are giving words, right? These are God pouring out his blessing, and it's connected with what? The metaphor that's used here is that he makes his face shine upon you, like the light of his eyes shining upon you. So what it means to have a gaze that's like God's gaze is to be gracious. For God to see a need is for him to meet a need. Okay? So to look at things the way God looks at things is to look at things with a gracious eye. To see a need is to do something about a need. To see a need and turn away from it is an evil eye. To see a need and do something about it is a good eye. It's a spiritually healthy way of viewing things. You can see the world in two ways, which means there's two ways of acting in the world then. Right? So the evil eye means that you're in darkness. A selfish eye is in darkness. It means you're going to act in a selfish way. You're going to behave in a way that fits with that kind of seeing. But a good eye, a healthy eye, a clear spiritual vision means it's going to guide you into a way of acting. You're going to behave in a way that's consistent with that. You're going to look at the world either for what you can get from it, or else you're going to be looking for needs that you can meet. You're going to be looking for things you can take, or you're going to be looking for what you can give. You can look at the world from a heart of covetousness, or you can look at the world from a heart of contentment. And you cannot do both at the same time. You can't be simultaneously motivated by greed and generosity. They don't work together. One of them is a way of darkness, and one of them is a way of light. And light and darkness don't mix. The evil eye sees the world as a scarce place. There's not enough for everybody. I've got to make sure I've got enough for me. But there's not abundance in the world. There's not blessing in the world. It's just enough for me. But the good eye sees the world the way it really is, which is this. The world is a place of abundance. God has put more than enough in the world. That's what it means to see the world for as it truly is, as God created it. There's more than enough. God is more than capable of taking care of everybody's needs. You don't have to hoard and protect yourself from everybody taking your stuff. God has enough. So which way will you see the world? Will you see it with a good eye or with an evil eye? God gave you eyes for a reason. Your eyes are a gift. You didn't earn them. Your vision is not anything you worked for. You can't claim to be able to see because you worked hard enough for it. God gave that to you. And He gave them to you for a reason, so that you would see like He sees. So that you would see all the blessings He's given, and you would see the needs around you and be gracious to them. And that is a life filled with light. It's a life lived in the light. You see where you're going. You see what God's doing, and you're a part of it. God is blessing, and you get to get on what He's doing. You get to be a part of how He blesses when you're willing to have an open hand with the blessings He gives you, and you just want to cooperate with His generous ways. So to have a good eye is to have a body filled with light. You become the light of the world when you have a good eye. Through behaving generously, through having the light of the body working properly, you actually also become a source of light to the world around you. An eye that is single goes with a heart and a mouth that is grateful. And an eye that is evil goes with a heart that is covetous. There's a passage that I think will help us connect what we just looked at with the next verse. In Ephesians chapter 5, if you want to read along, I'm going to read a section of verses here. If you think you might have a hard time paying attention, I'd encourage you to turn over to Ephesians chapter 5. We'll read just a whole paragraph, really. Ephesians chapter 5. There's some key overlap between what we just read and what we're about to look at in the next verse in Matthew in this passage here. Paul wrote this, "Be ye therefore followers of God, as dear children, and walk in love, as Christ hath also loved us, and hath given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savor. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness," notice he puts those three things together, "let it not be once named among you as becometh saints. Neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor jesting, which are not convenient, but rather giving of thanks. For this ye know that no whoremonger or unclean person, nor covetous man, who is an idolater, hath any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no man deceive you with vain words. For because of these things cometh the wrath of God upon the children of disobedience. Be not ye therefore partakers with them. For ye were sometimes darkness, but now are ye light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. You hear what it means here to be a child of light? A child in the likeness of Christ, a child in the family of God. It not only means avoiding fornication and uncleanness and things like that, but right there paralleled with those kinds of sins that maybe you think, oh, those are really bad, is covetousness. A heart that's covetous, and he specifically calls this one idolatrous. It's an idolatrous thing to be covetous. Coveting is not a little sin. Maybe we have a kind of a hierarchy of sin in our mind where we think maybe there's some big bad ones. Oh, fornication and uncleanness, these are big bad ones. Coveting though, yeah, I let some coveting go here and there, it's fine. For these reasons comes the wrath of God on people. Coveting. God is enraged, like Christ was at the money changers in the temple. Christ, he's enraged with covetousness. He's gracious to us. He's patient with us. But the sin of covetousness is not a small problem that God overlooks, because it goes with darkness. It's the old way. It's the world's way. It's not the way of the children of light. We're the children of light. We're the children of the kingdom of Christ and of God, he says. So walk as children of light. Be a child of light. Forsake covetousness. Forsake that heart that only ever wants and takes and hoards and gets. Leave that behind. That's not who we are to be anymore. We're not to be idolaters. And the idea of idolatry is very important as we look at this last verse we're going to focus on tonight in Matthew chapter 7. If you want to look back at that, Matthew 7 and verse 6, excuse me, we're in chapter 6 still. Chapter 6 and verse 24. Verse 24. This verse is very related to what we're talking about already. Jesus says, no man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. Worshipping mammon is the way to be a slave to the corrupt system of the world. And I say worshiping mammon because I think Jesus uses this word mammon here. The reason the word is selected, there are other words for money and wealth. He could have used the word treasures on earth again, or that phrase again, or something like that. But specifically this word mammon, what I found in studying this is, I'll just read a quote from one of the commentaries. He said, mammon is wealth and status personified and presented as an idol pitted against God, reminiscent of ancient Israelite showdowns between the Lord and the false idols of the world. The emphasis on the oneness and singularity in this passage, like the single eye, has already reminded us of the Shema's emphasis on God's oneness and the necessity of wholehearted singular devotion to Him. And what he says there by Shema, he's talking about that prayer from Deuteronomy chapter 6. It says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy might. So he's saying that when it brings up the idea of oneness, it kind of reminds you of that passage, that there's one Lord, there's one God, and He deserves all your devotion. And the reason that he says mammon like it's a name is because he's actually sort of naming the world system, the world's materialistic obsession as an idol with the name mammon. Jesus already taught us that earthly economic stability is merely an illusion. Economies crumble, right? Currencies lose their worth. Metals rust away. Your treasures, they all go away. That's But that's what mammon promises. Right? It gives all these things, those kinds of promises of wealth and status. And it's important to recognize with mammon is it's not just money. Okay, it's the idea of the stability that people pursue through economic gain, as though all stability is found in the economy. This isn't a new thing. This isn't just a recent thing that's developed. This has been, since there's been such a thing as money, which is a really long time, people have looked for stability in the economy. That's mammon. Looking for all your stability in the economic system, which means it includes both money and also status, right? Because both of those are a kind of credit. Right? Cash any kind of capital. This is like a financial credit, but status is kind of a reputational credit, right? So some people they're in the whole business of economy. They're you could say worshiping mammon. Maybe it's less about the money for them and more about the status, but it's still mammon. Mammon it's both money and status. Mammon is the false god of materialism, consumerism, and economic stability. The economic stability is not a problem, but it isn't stable in and of itself. And this is maybe very bold of me, and I would say I could be wrong here, but I would dare say that maybe with more devotion than any nation ever has done before, America worships mammon. Maybe the number one false god of America that, frankly, it feels kind of hard to preach against sometimes, actually, because it's pretty unpopular. But that's because it's such a popular god in America, the idol of mammon. As a nation, we do just about everything we do for economic reasons, don't we? It's kind of the number one motivator. Why do people vote for people who ought not be voted for oftentimes? And usually it's economic reasons. We're willing to make all kinds of sacrifices for economic advances, to make our pocketbooks a little fatter, to make ourselves feel a little bit more stable. We use abortion to sacrifice our children by the millions on the altar of mammon so that women can stay in the workforce and be more productive. That's still child sacrifice to the false god mammon. It's still happening today. You realize that is the number one reason people are doing abortions, is because it's not economic. It's not financially convenient for them to have a kid. People work themselves like slaves in their jobs so that they can just get a little bit more, for a little bit more wealth, a little bit more comfort, a little bit more status. They'll lie, they'll cheat, they'll steal, all in the name of the great mammon. And why? Because mammon promises stability, ease, comfort. Just like the false gods in the Old Testament. Why did they bow down to Baal? Why did they sacrifice their kids to Molech? Because those gods said, we'll give you good crops. We'll make you stable. We'll make you comfortable. And they were slaves to these false gods because they were afraid otherwise they wouldn't have stability. There wouldn't be enough otherwise. They wouldn't be safe unless they operated by this system. The world, although they don't believe in, at least our part of the world doesn't believe in gods, they still worship false gods. It's still just as idolatrous. And then Christians are seen as crazy for being willing to be sacrificial in with their goods. Or maybe you're warned against, don't be too generous. Don't give away too much. Don't make too many sacrifices. Meanwhile, the world is out there, again, sacrificing children in the name of money. It is truly, the world are the ones, they're the ones that are crazy. They've lost their mind. They're way off balance. The way of Christ, the way of generosity, the way of sacrificing maybe some of your stability and your comfort is the true way of balance. right? Following Jesus is much more balanced than the world's way. So stop paying homage to mammon. Don't buy mammon's lies. There are two ways of seeing the world. You can either see the world as ultimately dependent upon human economy or upon God's goodness. Where do good things in the world come from? Is it ultimately the economies of humans, or is it because God lets goodness continue to exist in the world? And He's gracious enough to use our economic system, right? We get to buy goods with our money, and that's a blessing. He can use it, but human economy is not the source of goodness in the world. God is. Where does the goodness of creation come from? It comes from the Lord, our master. The alternative to mammon is to serve and to worship God. Jesus said in Matthew 23:19, "Call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father, which is in heaven. Neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ." Christ is our master. And unlike mammon, He is a kind master. He doesn't ask for child sacrifice. He's good to us. He says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Mammon doesn't give anybody rest. Mammon says, "Work for me, work harder, be my slave." Jesus says, "I will give you rest. I'm kind, I'm gentle. Come and work for me. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus is a way greater master than mammon. Jesus also teaches us that God is our Father who looks after us like children. We are His kids. We aren't slaves in His system. We are His kids, His children. He takes care of us. We get to be God's children. We aren't just cogs in a machine like the world often treats us, to be honest. We aren't just slaves. We are children of God. You cannot be a slave to mammon and a servant of God. And both of those two are asking for your full devotion. They're both asking you to give everything. And at some point you're going to be torn. You're going to go one way or the other. God is calling you to live with open hands, not gripping tightly to anything you own. Mammon is standing over your shoulder, though, like a slave master, telling you to do everything you can to get more, take more, gather more, hoard more. You're going to have to say a no to one or the other eventually. So whom will you serve? Who is your God? Christ or mammon? There's two ways. I'll say it like Joshua did. He said, "Now therefore fear the Lord and serve Him in sincerity and truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it seem evil to you," and that literally, the wording there is literally, if it's evil in your eyes, if that rings a bell. "If it seem evil to you, unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom ye will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served, which are on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." If God is the Lord Jesus, then serve Him. If mammon is God, then serve mammon. If you think mammon can do everything for you, then give it all your devotion. Give it your all. But what can it do for you in the end? It doesn't last. It burns up, it blows away. It can't do anything for you. You can't serve God and mammon. You can't see the world with a clear eye and an evil eye. There's two ways. You can see the world by the goodness, the abundance, the generosity of God, or you can see it selfishly, scarcely, and darkly. Whom will you serve? Who is your God? Let's pray.